which is the ancestral homeland and territory of the Ohlone people. The Ohlone were stewards of these lands for millennia before colonization began. Today, they are in a struggle for decolonization, a struggle for their rightful sovereignty, and a struggle to rematriate these lands and return them to Indigenous stewardship. They are also in a fight to defend their sacred sites against continued desecration. The West Berkeley Shell Mound and Village site, which is the oldest Ohlone sacred site in the area and the last one to remain an open space, is once again being threatened by capitalist real estate development. Ohlone leaders are fighting tirelessly to defend the Shell Mound today and for future generations of Ohlone people. If you're joining us from outside the Bay Area, and I know that many of you are, you're on Indigenous land too. And so I invite all of us to ask, whose land are we on, and how can we support the organizing of the rightful stewards of that land? And so we gather today for this conversation about visionary organizing for decolonization, grounded in our commitment to supporting decolonization struggles, starting with the places that we call home, but also across Turtle Island and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you, David, for the land acknowledgement. Thank you all for joining us for today's panel, Visionary Organizers, Fighting Colonization from the US to the Philippines to Palestine. Huge appreciation to the incredible organizers who have joined us today for this conversation. Your brilliance and leadership is at the forefront of today's movement for collective liberation. My name is Rochelle Watson. I'm part of the Catalyst Project, and I'll be serving as moderator. Indigenous people are leading and winning fights to protect people, the planet, and what is sacred. We gathered today to learn from and lift up the powerful Indigenous movements here on Turtle Island, in Palestine, and in the Philippines. These decolonization struggles are foundational to social justice organizing, and it is critically important that we learn from and show up for these struggles. As we move through the conversation, please feel free to send in your questions through the Q&A Zoom function. You should be able to see a button at the bottom of your screen. Or if you're watching on Facebook Live, feel free to put your questions in the comments. We'll take these questions at the end of the panel. In the spirit of moving resources into the hands of POC-led organizations, we are asking for donations to fund the incredible work of these powerful organizers. We will put the donation link in the chat now. So please dig deep, and we'll circle back again after the panel with an additional ask. Before we start, I would like to lift up the families and loved ones of the 8 victims of the horrific shootings in Georgia on Tuesday, primarily Asian women. We are outraged by this deadly white supremacist violence and see it within the context of both the long history of anti-Asian racism and the current rise of anti-Asian violence. With love, rage, and solidarity, we commit to continuing to fight for a world that honors the lives and dignity of Asian, Asian American, and Pacific Islander women, gender nonconforming people, sex workers, and other marginalized and criminalized workers, immigrants, the undocumented, and all who are targeted with sexist and white supremacist violence. These are intense times, and may we hold this space today with care and tenderness. Also, just a couple days ago marked the 18-year anniversary of the invasion of Iraq, and it feels important to lift up the incredible ongoing resistance of the Iraqi people to US imperialism. We so rarely, if at all, hear about this resistance and struggle for self-determination. As someone who's been involved in Palestine solidarity for the past 18 years, I've come to realize how deep the invisibility of this resistance is here and the incredible power of being able to connect with, learn from, resource, and take action alongside the leaders of these struggles across the globe in their countries and in the diaspora, which brings us to our incredible lineup today. So let's begin by hearing brief introductions from each of our panelists. We'll begin with Irma Shauf-Bajar, who's the current national chairperson of GABRIELA USA. Turning it over to you, Irma.
Thanks so much, Rochelle, and thank you to the Catalyst Project for inviting me here today. My name again is Irma Shauf-Bajar. I go by he, she, and shia pronouns, and also want to acknowledge that I am also on Ohlone people's land, which some people call Oakland, California. As Rochelle mentioned, I'm the current chairperson of GABRIELA USA, and we're part of the National Democratic Movement of the Philippines, grassroots organization of Filipino women's organization across the US, fighting for the liberation of our Filipino people and oppressed peoples of the world. And in short, we're really here to educate, organize, and mobilize our people here in the US and really build a strong mass movement and build the broadest anti-imperialist united front alongside Black, Brown, Indigenous, Palestinian, queer, and trans people to really bring liberation to all people around the world. So thank you for having me, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Sandra Tamari, the Executive Director of Adalah Justice Project and a dear comrade.
Thank you, Rochelle. Thanks to everyone who is organizing and to all the interpreters that are doing very difficult work, and to my co-panelists. I'm really honored to be here with you both. I'm Sandra Tamari. I'm a Palestinian. I live on Kickapoo and Kakaskia lands, known as St. Louis, Missouri. I do run the Adalah Justice Project. We're a Palestinian advocacy organization that works to do something called de-exceptionalize Palestine, meaning that we work to embed Palestine into a progressive agenda, to a decolonial agenda, to end what we call the Palestine exception. What is the Palestine exception? Simply, it's being against the wall at the southern border of the US, but at the same time justifying the siege of Gaza and the Israeli apartheid wall. It's, standing up against the Muslim ban here, but supporting Israel's ban of Palestinian refugees from returning home. It's supporting the right to protest and the right to free speech, but silencing Palestinian efforts for their calls for boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel, or false conflation of support for Palestinian rights with anti-Semitism. So we're, doing all we can to make sure that Palestine isn't left out of these struggles. And at the same time, we're educating our own people to help them understand that Israel is not exceptional either. That Israel is like so many colonial powers across the globe, that Israel's settler colonialism has its roots in what happened on this continent and in imperialism that's happening around the globe. So I'm excited to dig into that with all of you.
Thanks so much, Sandra. And finally to you, Krystal Two Bulls, the director of the Land Back campaign for the NDN Collective.
Yes, thank you, Rochelle. Apiva, Shev, relatives, Mene, Wosta, Nanehav. My name's Krystal Two Bulls. As Rochelle mentioned, I'm Oglala Lakota Northern Cheyenne, calling in from Northern Cheyenne territory here in beautiful southeastern Montana. And also just echo that it's really an honor to be here with my co-panelists and the facilitators and with Catalyst. And it's really an honor. And also just want to add that, I'm the director of the Land Back campaign and want to add a little context in terms of what land back means. I know that, there's many different ways we can look at that and define it, but for us, land back is the literal reclaiming of relationship to land, in the literal reclaiming of land and all of the things that were stolen from Indigenous peoples when we were forcefully removed from the land. And our primary objectives at the Land Back campaign with NDN Collective is to shut down Mount Rushmore, the ultimate shrine of white supremacy that's here on Turtle Island in our sacred lands, the Black Hills, and also to reclaim all public lands in the Black Hills. And third, supporting the Land Back movement globally to reclaim all public lands on Turtle Island, and support those that are working to reclaim relationship to their lands abroad. And so really a broad movement, and just really honored to be here again, and wanted to add a little context, but also add that NDN Collective is an organization dedicated to building Indigenous power, working towards collective liberation for all peoples. And so, it's really an honor to be here with, my fellow panelists and with everyone. So looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you so much, Krystal. And it's such an honor to have you all here with us today. The first question to start off our conversation, and it is a big question, is what would decolonization actually mean on each of your lands? And how do you see your work intersecting with the struggles that the other panelists are organizing within? And Krystal, will you kick us off beginning here on Turtle Island? And then we'll hear from Irma and then Sandra.
Yes. Thank you, Rochelle. It's a big question. And I might work a little backwards. I think to really understand how we decolonize and how we work together collectively around decolonization, we have to really understand like the roots, right? And especially if we're talking about Turtle Island here. And so for us at the Land Back campaign, the way that we really look at this intersectionality and whatnot is from our analysis and starting in a historical context, right? And going back to the doctrine of discovery and really looking at that was, the religious and legal mechanism that allowed for the claiming of these lands that Indigenous folks were already living on behalf of a kingdom or a queendom, right? And so there were no Christians here, so these lands were claimed. And we were forcefully removed so that way the settler colonizers can, move in and basically build an entire nation over the top of us. And that was all enforced by the US military. And so I think that we have to really look at the origins of these like US militarism being formed around Indigenous resistance to being removed from our lands. And then in a really, really general way of looking at that template of removing Indigenous peoples from their lands here in the colonial process that happened, that was enforced by the US military, was like a template that then is taken and used to access and gain resources and land in other Indigenous peoples' communities and lands overseas, right? I know it's a super general way of looking at it, and there's so much more to that and so many more pieces, but that's really how I look at our relationships to each other, is that, one of our principles is like, we don't win by ourselves. And I say that constantly, like our struggle as Indigenous peoples, and even as like a veteran myself, an anti-war and anti-militarism veteran, we don't win these struggles by ourselves. We have to work collectively. And for me, I think intersectionality goes a little bit deeper of, it's actually the same fight, right? Like I think that it, to understand things, we have to continue talking about intersectionality. But for me, the relationships that we build across movement spaces are so important that we have to go beyond being allies and go beyond being accomplices. And we have to really build like relative relationships, right? And so that way, when we go into these fights and we go into these struggles, that Sandra's struggle is mine and Irma's struggle is mine, and that we work collectively on these and we find all of the points that we align at and we push everything into those to like work together. And I think that also naming and having like an understanding of like white supremacy, right, as like something that's not just, an ideology, but something that's an actual system, in the way that the different institutions in Turtle Island in the United States embody and uphold white supremacy is a really important point, because nobody benefits from that. And we are all impacted by that here and globally, right? And I think it's really important to understand how that plays out here in the United States, the so-called United States, right? Of Indigenous invisibility in the perpetuation of like anti-Blackness being two pillars that uphold white supremacy here, and how white supremacy then goes to oppress everybody that lives within this. And so I think just really defining those pieces and understanding like how that process played out over history is really important to understand how decolonization plays out in the work that we're doing. Because if we are going to really get at the roots of white supremacy and colonization and militarism and US imperialism, then we have to go back to the roots, right? And as Indigenous peoples, for us, that means land back. Because we know when we steward our own lands and are in relationship with our relatives, that everyone benefits. And that mitigates climate change and, all of these things for us to even have a world to live in. But yeah, I think that's really where I start out with when I think about intersectionality and decolonization, is like defining it. in really understanding how it is all connected and how our struggles are the same struggles, maybe just playing out in different places. Yeah, I think that I'll just end it right there.
Thank you, Krystal. Irma, do you want to take off from there?
Sure. Thanks so much for that, Krystal. I do first want to acknowledge that I did not mention disabled folks when I was talking about building solidarity in our mass movement. I appreciate you, Judith, for putting that in the chat, and don't want to erase, the leadership and disabled folks in our society, and for their current fights that we are also not just in solidarity with, but is also our fight to fight alongside with them. I'm saying that also, there's like 330 people here today that I don't know. And just gonna be real, it's been a heavy week. And I'm feeling carried by Krystal and by Sandra, and for Judith, for you, and for the Catalyst Project. And I just want to be real that, when I was preparing for this particular topic, there was a lot of traumas that kept coming in talking about, when we talk about colonization. And I had this whole spiel about the whole current situation of the Philippines, our basic problems that leads us basically to US imperialism, to landlessness, to corrupt bureaucrats, to the government. And the more that I was like reading and rereading our history and trying to prep, I just felt that in my body, that the impact of like the colonization of our people in the Philippines over 300 years of the Spaniards, then the US, and then the Japanese, and then the US back. I kept thinking, how do I talk to these people who are so interested in being a part of the movement and who is already in the movement, and not just talk about these like impacts or what's happening, because it's still happening, right? And I can't help but, think about, of course, what happened in Atlanta, right? The rise of Asian violence very much stems from colonization, stems from US imperialism, stems from our history of being occupied in our countries. And I think I'm like, how do I connect, of course, to Krystal's struggle and to the Palestinian struggle? We are all connected, specifically because of the colonizations of our countries. And, I was shaking before I came today, really thinking that it is so hard to start to think about decolonizing like different lands or even our people, like even when I think about my mom or my aunties and my titas, because that is still the situation in the Philippines. It is still the situation of natives and indigenous folks and of Palestinians. And what I do want to say is, like, I know what we're fighting for. And I know that unfortunately, the struggle that we all have with each other is our enemy, right? It is the colonizers, it is imperialism, it is, the military. And what feels like the most important thing to say is even thinking about how did I even end up here in Oakland, right? And I was like, they're actually, because of the occupation and colonization of the Philippines, migration wasn't beautiful or isn't beautiful for my people, right? Because they were forced to leave the country. When I first started actually organizing in 2006, I learned that 3,500 Filipinos leave the country every day. Now, 15 years later, I hear that number is 6,500 people leave the country every day. And there is this legal trafficking of our Filipino people. The number one export that resources that's coming out of the Philippines is our people, right? And so it's no wonder my family ended up in Hawaii. It's no wonder there's a lot of Filipinos all over, because we are being treated as commodities, and really our remittances to the Philippines is needed to keep the country afloat, right? And really talking about the lived experience of why, you know, our titas or our moms or our aunties stay in abusive relationships or can't get divorces because of the colonization of the Spaniards to our people or these cultures and these practices. And so there's so much that we have specifically in common. And the more that I think about even, you know, with our Palestinian comrades, you know, thinking about Israel, the US, and the Philippine government are also teaming up to talk about surveillance and to crush our people and talk about COINTELPRO. And it's now really specifically across seas. And the people who are human rights defenders, not just in the Philippines, but here are being targeted. And our US tax dollars are going to that, right? And, you know, the more that I just think about like, how do we start that process? And it's this, right? It's like organizing, it's being involved. It's not just, you know, taking these education, but really being with the people who are most oppressed or exploited, or learn side by side to organize with folks, like learning from my comrades who are fighting for land back here in the Shelmond, and learning specifically from our Palestinian comrades here, or constantly fighting the Zionists that are so fucking cruel here in the Bay, you know. And this morning I woke up and I told my partner, I'm tired. I'm tired because we're losing people. Our people are getting killed. You know, the state violence against Black, Brown, Indigenous folks here, disabled folks continues to get worse, right? And I think that, you know, all the more it calls for the reason why we organize and why we have these panels, you know, to really learn specifically from our history, but also our present, and how to get involved. And I already told my panelists, co-panelists, that I wasn't, you know, feeling well. And it's not like me to come to a panel this way, but the violence, the killings in this pandemic, the isolation is real. And I'm just grateful for every learning lesson that I get to be with all of you, for Catalyst, for the space that you're training up folks and building our movement. And I'm like, I need to show up because I need you all. And probably going to be a mess until 4 o'clock. So I don't want to say sorry. I just want to say thank you for being here. And yeah, thank you for being here.
We are so thankful for you being with us today, Irma, and for bringing all of you and all of this, and just bringing so much heart and truth and realness to this conversation. So thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Sandra now to continue with that question.
Irma, I'm so grateful to you. I'm so grateful because so much of the work, you know, doing this all the time, you feel numb. You become numb because you have to survive, right? The pain and the trauma is so intense. Every day we're losing our people, and we put up shields, right, to protect ourselves, because it's impossible to take on all of that. And so I'm just so grateful to you for helping me reconnect to my deep pain and to feel it, because I know that when it just sits inside, it's unhealthy, and that, you know, what you're doing for all of us is giving us an outlet. And so we're so grateful. I mean, all the things you said are so, you know, everything that Krystal and Irma have said so far could be our, you know, the Palestinian story. You know, we're dealing with systems that learn from each other, that collaborate with one another, and that they share. I mean, when Israel and the US say we share values, you know, this is the famous line, we're connected to Israel because of our shared values. We know what those shared values are. We know it's not, you know, their rhetoric of, you know, liberalism, human rights. What we're dealing with is their shared values of genocide and settler colonialism and militarism and terrible, terrible violence. I mean, for me, decolonization is quite simple. It's, repatriation of indigenous land and life. And for Palestinians, that means the ability to go home, the right of return. Most Palestinians live in exile. I'm one of the lucky ones. I was able to, because my father was an immigrant settler on this land, we were able to get a passport. But millions of Palestinians remain stateless, refugees from 1948, 1967, and live in camps, refugee camps to this day. My only connection to my homeland was as a tourist. I have to go in through Israeli, checkpoints. And the last time I tried to go home to a cousin's wedding, I was put in, I landed at the airport and was put into a separate room, detained for 8 hours, questioned 5 different times. What's your father's name? What's your grandfather's name? Who do you know? Tell us, write down every person you know in Palestine, in Lebanon, in Jordan, any Arab that you know, write their name down. And after those 5 hours, I was put into prison. And then the next day sent back home, sent back to the US. And I haven't been back to Palestine since. And I'm one of the lucky ones. I have been able to visit. I have been able to touch down. I have been able to see my family. And so, but the pain is so deep. So decolonization means our right to go home. It means simple things like not having checkpoints at every few meters, not having our children put into military detention, the right to even be able to access life-saving vaccines. Israel is denying Palestinian ability to import vaccines, while the world is celebrating how great their program of vaccination has been. In Tel Aviv, the bars and the restaurants are fully open, and miles away in the West Bank and in Gaza, Palestinians are dying in hospital hallways because no beds remain. And this is just, the latest example of Israeli apartheid. And so in short, decolonization requires the end of Zionism. Zionism being, the political ideology that drives Israel's oppression of the Palestinian people, that makes us the people that need to be erased, must be erased, eliminated. It's been a process that's been ongoing for decades. A reminder that settler colonialism is not an event. It's a structure, it's a process. So today, people continue to lose their homes, continue to lose their land, continue to be deported and forced off their land. And so, what we work for is the repatriation of our people on their land. And so land back is the best slogan there can be.
Thank you all for your visions and for laying out that these are not separate struggles, have their own context and specificity, but in so many ways, struggling against a common enemy, and to just hear the resonance in what you're sharing. For the next question, we know that women and gender nonconforming folks often bear a higher burden of the violence of colonization and play crucial roles in the resistance. I was wondering, Sandra, if you could start by talking about how you see that playing out in your work.
Women are always at the forefront of resistance, and unfortunately also bear the higher burden of violence of colonization. Colonization is a hyper-masculine and violent process. It affects every aspect of life. Particularly Israeli settler colonialism impacts women in intimate ways. Home demolitions mean that it's women that are the caretakers, that have to comfort the children. It's, the deliberate denial of healthcare that leads to very high rates of miscarriage, the inability to travel to give birth in a hospital. It's watching your children being detained as young as 8 years old for picking herbs. This is the latest thing we've been seeing. It's spring in Palestine and people are picking their native herbs for cooking. And the kids are home with COVID, they can't go to school. So they're collecting flowers for the families and herbs, and they're being harassed by Israeli settlers and being detained by the military. I mean, Israel has called Palestinian wombs, ticking time bombs, demographic threats. It's not a surprise when we hear people, Israeli academics say things like, by raping the wives and mothers of Palestinian combatants, we could stop militants. Or Israeli lawmakers say things like, Palestinian women must be killed too, because they give birth to little snakes. I mean, these are actual quotes. Palestinian women intimately understand that there's no free homeland, there's no national liberation without free women. It's very difficult to raise feminist flags at this moment, right? Because people are under such terrible structural violence. But they're pushing, right, to make sure that ending all forms of violence is the national liberation struggle, including patriarchal and heteronormative violence within our own society. But more relevant to this Catalyst audience and to all of you is to say how this all plays out in the West, right? Specifically here in the US. The reality that I've just explained of this racialized and gendered violence against Palestinians doesn't stop Israeli propaganda from claiming that they're more civilized than Palestinians and that they're more liberal when it comes to issues of women, or they're a gay-friendly destination, using pinkwashing tactics to undermine Palestinian efforts at liberation. But we're pushing back against this propaganda and this imperial feminism and these pinkwashing efforts. I'm really proud to be part of a new formation called the Palestinian Feminist Collective. It's a group of Palestinians and Arab feminists here in the US. And just last week, they issued a pledge declaring that Palestine is a feminist issue. And it is something that you can sign on to as well. And uplift that you understand that Palestine is a commitment to life, is a commitment to ending capitalism. It's a commitment to ending colonial extraction and US empire. And that our vision is really grounded in creating a radically different future that's based on our interconnectedness. And so, yeah, that's just some of the thoughts I have about how women and gender nonconforming are impacted.
Thank you. Krystal, do you want to share along those lines as well?
Yeah, thank you, Sandra, for that. I mean, I think I can probably go through bullet by bullet and say the same things, right? Of the way that Native women here have been impacted. And that just speaks to how normalized that has become. And I think that, yeah, I mean, it's historical and it's intentional. And I think that's the part that I want to highlight, is the fact that these are very intentional processes, right? And for us, going back to understanding the stripping of roles and responsibilities within Indigenous communities, right? So preventing us from engaging in the roles and responsibilities and kinship in relative structures that we had handed down to us since time immemorial and had always practiced, right? And so it's stripping us of that. And going back to what Sandra was saying in terms of like even harvesting our own medicines and putting up our lodges, and for our men to be hunting and like bringing back, and in us providing life and giving life, those things have been intentionally stripped from us, right down to forced sterilization of our Indigenous women in the healthcare system, this current healthcare system, the forced sterilization of Indigenous women across these lands, right? And even going back to like calling us squaws and labeling men as bucks and women as does. And so it starts intentionally of how we are defined and stripping us of all the things that we know, which for us is all related to the land, right? Because for us, the land, like Mother Earth, right? And some even say like Unchi Maka, like Grandmother Earth, it's a feminine entity because it gives life, right? She gives us life. And so by removing us and preventing us from our traditional roles and responsibilities and our knowledge that's based on the land, it's removing that feminine power, right? And I think it's important to look at that. And it's important to look at it from the perspective of us reclaiming relationship to land. And when doing so, we're reclaiming relationship to our roles and our responsibility and our kinship, and our governing structures that were always, we're always guided by women, right? And where there were roles for everyone in our communities, and even getting at, our gender non-conforming relatives, our two-spirit relatives were always considered sacred people and holy people in our communities. And with colonization, it intentionally removed that sacredness and intentionally removed those teachings to where we don't have that anymore. And it's coming back, it's being reclaimed and revitalized. But I think that all of those things were intentional steps in getting us to internalize the colonization, getting us to assimilate, and getting us to disappear if we don't. And so I think that those are all really intentional pieces. I also think, it's important to like think about these in terms of like MMIW for us as Indigenous peoples. When we go to so-called Canada and here within the US, our legal systems allow for the rape and the disappearing and the murdering and the brutalization of our Indigenous women. And not just Indigenous women, all women in reality. And so just looking at MMIW, like missing and murdered Indigenous women, is a huge issue that on our lands, because we have sovereignty on our lands, but it's more of like a pseudo sovereignty that basically we can't actually prosecute non-Indigenous men that brutalize, murder, and rape our women on our own lands. It's legally impossible for us to do that right now. I mean, there's some momentum around different legislation and pieces that are actually like getting pushed forward to remedy that. But as of right now, like on my lands currently, we don't have the ability to prosecute non-Indigenous men or, predators from abusing our women, our children, our families, our homes. It just isn't there. And that also is intentional, right? And I think that on the flip side of all of that, though, knowing this history and knowing how these processes play out and how intentional they are, I also just like lean into the fact that like our women, as Sandra said too, like have always been on the forefront of these fights. We've always been fighting to protect and to continue to give life, right? And so we have long histories of women warriors who fought alongside their partners, who fought alongside their fathers and their brothers, and went to war and went to battle, and who led and who made decisions that impacted our people, who led us spiritually, who led us in all of these fronts. And so I think that, when we look at rematriation, it reminds me of how strong we are as women in the roles and the important roles that women in gender non-conforming relatives play in our communities and how powerful we are. And so I think that leaning into that power, and not letting that be something that can be taken away, right, is something that I really think about a lot. And then also just thinking about roles overall for our men and our women, our two-spirit relatives, and just thinking about the reclamation of all those roles helps all of us step back into our power and ultimately decolonize and heal and move forward, right? But yeah, I don't know, those are kind of my initial thoughts around rematriation and in this work.
Thank you, Krystal. Irma?
It's hard, right, not to think about like our caretakers, our parents, our mom, our aunties, you know, in terms of how they have taken care of us. And you know, again, revisiting kind of the history of our colonization of our people, of like what does 300 years of colonization do to my grandma, to my mom, that's passed on to me. And you know, by law, women were subordinate to their husbands in the Philippines, right? They couldn't own their property, similar to what both my co-panelists are talking about in their communities. And you know, not giving their education because, you know, of course, the government would fear the strength of women, right, to be able to be smarter or to organize. And they basically were trained to be a particular way, where I realized that that's been passed down to my generation, and also to why I also operate the way that I do, right? Like what you were saying too, Sandra, is like holding things in, carrying it like this is my job. And, you know, when I break it down to where it's not an individual mistake and it is systemic, that's when I get, of course, more and more pissed off, because this has always been the plan of, you know, the rich, of the people who are the ruling class. And when I think about the layers of oppression, specifically in the Philippines, right, there's 3 different layers. The first one is national oppression that is caused by US imperialist domination over the Philippines. We are a semi-colonial, semi-feudal is what we say, society in the Philippines, right? And the second one is class exploitation from the ruling class. So the rich landlords, the politicians. So even this culture of misogyny and patriarchy that allows men, you know, to be violent to women. We have President Rodrigo Duterte, who basically has already told many times his armed forces of the Philippines to rape our women, and to say that it's okay, saying that of course Filipino women are going to get raped because they're beautiful. You have women who also supported that, right, or laughed about it, because he would make jokes as the Philippine president, right? So this culture of misogyny, right? Even saying to his army, shoot those rebel freedom fighters in the vagina, because they're useless without their vagina, right? So the sickening of, you know, him, Trump, these like men who are in power, that makes it seem that it is okay because of really the fear that they have of the power of women, right? Because of our history of resistance, because of what we're talking about, that of course we're going to resist, of course we're going to be in the forefront, because of how we've been treated, because of how our bodies are used as commodities, because we've been violated, because we've been raped, because, you know, the history of the comfort women is still an issue, because there's still no apology, right, of histories of women who basically, who have been, you know, like targeted and raped specifically to take care or comfort soldiers, right? And so, and the third one is the systemic oppression is really due to patriarchy, right? So I don't identify necessarily as a women's organization. I don't say I'm a feminist, depending on like how people identify of like what a feminist is. I say that I'm a freedom fighter, a revolutionary. Like I'm trying to get to genuine liberation. I'm trying to get to, you know, genuine democracy for our people, right? And I don't think it is about the problem is just patriarchy. It is. That's our layer that, you know, as women, queer, trans, non-binary, gender expansive folks, like that's another layer on top of the bullshit that we have to deal with class exploitation and national oppression. And when I think about that, that is still very much in our society. That's why that white motherfucker thought it was okay to go up and shoot these women in Atlanta because of this culture saying that it's okay, right? To see them as like commodities, to see them as just bodies, right? And that's the piece where I'm just like, this system that has been in place for centuries in all of our different, places around the world, there was a part of me that was just like, how is my mom supposed to decolonize her mind if she doesn't have people like what we have? And that actually made me understand why my mom took what she had to take from my dad. This is why migrant women will leave their children for years and sometimes find out that their husbands will take care of their kids and say it's okay that they're fooling around with their neighbor because men have needs, because in their mind, that's been okay, right? And so I think about these things and I'm like, there's always, I'm just like, wait a minute, it's 2020, 2021. How are these men, these leaders, especially someone like bullshit Trump, gets to say shit like this, right? And it still happens. And it just makes me think, of course, like there's a need for our organizing. There's a need to educate, to organize, to mobilize and all that. And this is why there's a lot of people in leadership who are women, who are trans, who are gender nonconforming, because we are carrying this shit. And of course we are triggered. Of course we're traumatized. And we have no choice but to keep going, right? And that's, for me, like GABRIELA, the National Democratic Movement in the Philippines, has been my political home because we are internationalists. It's not just about the Filipino people, right? It's about the Palestinians. It's about Indigenous folks. It's about trans folks. It's about disabled folks. It's about the people who are incarcerated. This is a people's movement. And actually, when I look around, of course, there's a lot of incredible leaders who look like me, look like Sandra, look like Krystal, look like Rochelle, because we have no choice to be in this struggle. And the history of our resistance and our power and our people and our allies is what makes us stronger, and is why they bring on more the military. They think about surveilling. That's why leaders like us get fucking red tagged, because they are scared. And it is scary, right? It is scary. And so, Julie de Lima, who is this elder in our movement, always stresses to us. We just had an assembly with GABRIELA, and she says, women were a part of the Filipinos' struggle, of the people's struggle against, oh wait, I'm sorry, hold on, wait, I got lost. Oh, here, the women's liberation movement. This is where I need to slow down. The women's liberation movement is a vital and integral part of the overall democratic movement. She stresses that without the militant participation of women, victory cannot be won. And so that's why our place is in the struggle, right? This is why we do the work. And I'll just end it by there. And again, what happened in Atlanta is not separate from what we're talking about today, right? And the exploitation of these like Asian women stems decades of US occupation in our motherlands. And it's here in the US. This bullshit is here, this violence is here. And this is why we do the work. I'll stop there.
Wow, thank you. We are now going to, well, first I just want to lift up that we have raised so far over $1,000, and I just want to encourage folks to dig deep and keep giving and support this work, because the next question we're going to get a little bit more into the specifics of the work that's currently underway. So please, if you can put the link back in the chat, if folks can donate. This is the last question before we'll move to the Q&A portion. So if you could each share some thoughts on how accomplices can best show up in this work, and if you have examples of effective solidarity, feel free to highlight, specific things that you're working on, specific efforts that need support. And if it's okay, Krystal, we'll turn this to you to start us off.
Yeah. Man, there's so many things, but I think that right now, I think I'm always asked these questions of like, how do folks show up? And I think that like the biggest thing for me is like, just show up and do the work. I mean, like, stop asking questions of how you do this and how you do that. Where should I go? Just do the work. And if you misstep, be open to being corrected and guided back in the other direction. Because it's a guarantee that you're going to misstep. I misstep every day. And those are all learning opportunities to do better and to grow from. And so I think that I encourage folks to just do the work. Don't wait for an invite. Don't wait for, you know, the best ways to go forward or any of that. I didn't go through any official trainings on to do any of this work. Like I had to do it because someone has to do it. And there's nothing in me that says it's okay to not do this work right now. And so like, I push people to do that as well. The other thing I think is like following the leads of Indigenous folks. And I think that's a huge thing is to be okay with the fact that you may have brilliant ideas, but if Indigenous folks and folks doing this work aren't open to that and they're moving in their direction, then you have to learn how to follow and support that. And I think that's a huge thing too. I think that pushing people beyond land acknowledgements, I think land acknowledgements was a great step in the right direction that we're trying to go. But now we're at the point where like, you know, go beyond land acknowledgements. It's not enough for you to get a Native person and to get them to acknowledge the land that they're on or to say, like, that's a good starting point. And now we're demanding that you go farther than that and you find a way to give the land back or help us and support us in reclaiming the land. I think for white allies specifically and accomplices, champion land back, you know, in terms of that, because there's a lot of fear attached to it, right? Folks they think that we're coming after homes and that, but we're not. We're saying public lands for our campaign, and we're specific about why we're saying that. That is a step. And so I think that if white accomplices can do the work of helping to dispel the fear in the myths around land back, and when we say that, that would be helpful for our struggles. And that paves the way for me to do this work in a way where I don't have to also combat fear and white folks having the fear of what that could possibly mean. And so have those conversations with your relatives and your people and your circles and your communities. The other one is like, give land back. If you are someone that has had land passed down generation to generation and you are living on these stolen lands, give the land back. There's nations that are fighting right now all across Turtle Island and beyond to reclaim that relationship to land. Give the land back. That's a huge thing. And then the other one is to find land back struggles across, like there's land back struggles happening in every state in the so-called United States right now, and farther than that. Find those struggles, do your work, do your due diligence, find them, support them, and then follow their lead with how you're supposed to do that. And so I think I push people to do those things. I also think that part of it is learning to open doors and then step aside. And maybe you don't go in that door. You open the door for someone like Irma or Sandra or myself or others to step in and to do that. I think that's a huge thing that I've come across. The last one is like, man, when Irma said like, I'm tired, like that really resonated with me too. Like I've been on this journey of trying to find ways to care for myself in all of this work. And it's not easy. Like it's hard work. And, you know, I don't get weekends and I don't get evenings off, or like this work is nonstop. It's ongoing, you know, like I don't work 9 to 5 hours. That is like a luxury. And so I think that for folks to really step up so that way we can take a knee is huge. And like learning how to do that and supporting us in our care for ourselves as well is a huge thing. that I'm just now learning and am definitely not good at. I mean, like, honestly, we're on a webinar on a weekend and I've been trying to do better about not doing things on the weekend, but like these conversations are important because more spaces like this are necessary and needed for us to do this work. These are things that, like, I know as an organizer that I may not live to see the fruits of the work that I'm doing right now, but I know that my descendants will benefit. And that means that I have to organize for the long term. That means I have to be well and healthy to organize for the long term. And so I think that these points of how folks can show up for us are really important, because that's less work for me to carry. That's less emotional labor that I have to carry. And so I think that that's a huge piece. And I think that extends beyond Turtle Island, right? That extends to everywhere that is fighting imperialism and the patriarchy and colonization and militarism and all of those, right? I think we have to really think about that. And then also looking and reimagining and following Indigenous peoples and oppressed people's leads on what land-based housing and food systems and healthcare systems and governing systems look like. Even if it's like out of your comfort zone, even if it's something that you may not be familiar with, trusting and following the leads on those areas specifically, because we're out here trying to dismantle these systems that uphold white supremacy and that continue to keep us oppressed. And then we're also trying to simultaneously build the things that we want in that place and create this world that we are fighting so hard for. And so I think if folks start to support those 4 areas as well, it helps us move farther along in this work. But I think those are the main things that I'm thinking of right now.
Thank you so much, Krystal. I'm going to just pause. These are, we have 20 minutes left, and this is such an important question, and I want to make sure Irma and Sandra have plenty of time, but I also want to give Maggie a chance to make a formal ask to everyone participating to give. I know I just saw that we're up to over $4,000. So Maggie, if I can turn it over to you, and then we'll come back and hear from Irma and Sandra on this question of accomplice roles and how to plug into your current work.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Rochelle. This space has been transformational, and watching everybody show up to show support in all these different ways has been amazing. These stories are bringing, and the truths that are coming up are bringing up a lot for me, I know, and hopefully for you too. And I'd like to check in, and maybe we could all put a word in the chat about how it's feeling to learn about decolonization from Indigenous leaders. Yeah, emotional, definitely. Painful, inspiring, liberating, unsettling, grateful, absolutely. Yeah, these stories are so powerful, and yet they're often not widely amplified. There's going to be a link to the chat in the chat again to donate. As you already know, Catalyst is collecting money, which will be split between the 3 organizations represented by today's speakers. We're raising money to support the work of these 3 amazing organizations: NDN Collective, Adalah Justice Project, and GABRIELA. Funding their work is an act of solidarity, not charity. That's very important, so I'll say it again. It's solidarity, not charity. We're not here to ask you to sponsor an individual child or to make a one-time donation to build a school. We're inviting you into the work of dismantling the root causes of suffering in the Philippines, in Palestine, and in the US. One of the biggest things I've learned from the Braden program is that grassroots fundraising builds collective power to make big change. It doesn't rely on the benevolence of foundations or benefactors, and it's a way for all of us to come together across different locations, class backgrounds, with unique experiences of privilege and oppression to stand together against imperialism. As a working class person, I can usually only donate a few dollars at a time, but I always feel empowered whenever I give. contributing in that way makes me feel like I can reclaim some of my agency to stand shoulder to shoulder with other poor and working class people. And it's an awesome feeling. It's amazing to see what we can all achieve together. And the small donations are just as meaningful as the big ones. We have over 300 people in this chat. I know that we can come together. We average $10 each and raise over $3,000. But I think we're gonna say, let me see. Yeah, we're at $6,416 currently, which is amazing. Yeah, I just had to check that number. And yeah, I think we can hit $10,000 to support global change. And some of us won't be able to give the $10. So if you can afford to give more, please do. And hopefully that link is in the chat. Thanks so much, y'all.
So thank you all. Wait till we come back with the panelists. Great. And appreciate you, Andy, calling specifically for folks with class privilege to step up their donations. Thank you for that, and for encouraging matching. Thank you. Let's see if we can get to $10,000 by the end of the call. So next, so let's hand it over to Sandra to answer that question around how accomplices can best show up in the work, and if you want to highlight any specific efforts that currently need support.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone who's giving. I'm really touched. I mean, I just want to endorse everything that Krystal said. There's not a lot to add. I mean, I'll just give a few pointers as far as, how you can approach the Palestine issue. General principles are, don't be afraid. There's this idea that it's too complex, it's too complicated, I don't want to touch it, because every time it comes up, it gets heated. What we've described today is really simple. Indigenous people are fighting to stay on their land, to stay alive. And it gets twisted out in the world because that's what empire does, right? So I just want you to be really confident, feel really confident that this is an issue that doesn't have a lot of gray area. Yes, of course, there are two people living on the land today, but a decolonized future doesn't mean that one group of people is excluded. A decolonized future means that there's no supremacy, that there's no people that are better than the others. And that's what we're seeking. So I don't want to hear things about this is two equal sides that are warring. Don't call it a conflict. That's been going on for centuries. No, this is a settler colonial project that started in the 20th century. And then finally, I would just say, you all as anti-racist organizers must expand your analysis beyond US borders. Our fight for racial justice must expand to the entire globe. If we stop at US borders, then we don't have an analysis of what's happening. We don't have a grounding to understand the problems that we're facing here, as Irma has pointed out with Atlanta, with the killings in Atlanta. We can't solve the issue if we don't understand the problem. So racial justice has no borders. Your anti-racist organizing must go way beyond what's happening here.
Thank you. And finally, Irma.
Thank you. Thanks, Sandra. Thanks, Krystal. The first thing that I thought about really is join the struggle, and meaning that join an organization so that you can be accountable to them and grow and learn and make mistakes and, struggle with. I think that there is a lot of incredible people who, are a part of the movement. And what I'm learning too is that I also want to create space for every single person, whether you're a driver or you're someone who likes to make sandwiches or have space. Like, we need to create a movement where everyone feels belong, right? Even our children and even our elders. And I think when I think about that, in the 15 years that I've been organizing, I also know that there were things that I did wrong or that was taught wrong to me, and I'm still learning. And I think the beautiful thing is that when we grow our movement, or when people join with creative ideas or a bigger network, we too are only stronger. So, when I think about United Front work and building this like big anti-imperialist movement without even saying we're anti-imperialist and we're really just fighting for the freedom of people, because sometimes, I remember when I came in, I'm like, what's imperialism? What is capitalism? I grew up and I was born in Hawaii. We don't even say people of color. I was like, what is people of color? Anyways, I'm just saying that we need to create a movement where everybody can join at any point. And also, like what Krystal's saying, like, we can also tap out and just be like, I need to rest, and then I'm going to come back, without shaming people, right? And so I think that we're really building a culture of what we're fighting for. And in the Philippine movement and the Palestinian movement, fighting for land back, like, there are different ways where people can show up, and it's not just through attending events. It's finding a place where you really can like be in an organization. So that's one thing. I think it's also really important, like what Sandra is saying, is to really understand each other's struggle, right? And like what Krystal's saying, like, don't ask me, please do your research, right? And so don't add more work for me. And that's not being like fucked up. It really is like, it does take work, right, to like learn. And it's not about just research. Like, ask people, have coffee with someone that might already know the answers or who are involved, right? And then really thinking about when there are campaigns or events or struggle, like, play a role that needs to be filled. Like, I still get like really tear jerk whenever I'm in the streets and I don't have to do security, and I feel safe because my comrades got my back, right? Or like other folks are protecting our contingent. Like, I feel like, yeah, we don't need the cops because I got my people. And that's a role that you can play too, right? One of the things I think about too is that, there's so many ways I'm sure people can plug into like supporting like GABRIELA or the Philippine movement. And we're learning too. I know they dropped it in the chat. We're now starting to do some legislative work of like, no US military aid to the Philippines, and holding the Philippines accountable because of the human rights killings that's happening. And we need more support, right? Because that's a new muscle as a grassroots organization, meaning we don't got no money. We not 501 something 3B 5. We pay $5 a month. That's how we make our money, right? And so I think a part of it is like, that's cool if you don't have money, but if you have networks, if you know a legislator, if you know someone that knows how to do these things, help us, right? So I think it's like the resource sharing, right? And I think the one thing that I do want to say, that as someone who has been learning more about lessons or culture, or learning more about working with different generations of organizers, is that I am seeing that identity politics is really dividing us and is creating actually more silos in our work, and for us to be very careful about identity politics and really center in solidarity. Not to say that, identity politics is bad, but I've been in spaces where people feel either too scared to like be involved, or giving too much space, that they're taking step back, or, that identity is coming before class and talking about racism. And so I just want us to also be careful about those things, and just like what Krystal's saying, show up and just do what you are able to, right? And I really do think that our best response to resisting imperialism and occupation and Zionism and white supremacy really is solidarity with one another. Because when I think of collective power, when I think of people power, whenever I get on a bullhorn, I think about the masses of people who are not suffering, the masses of people who are fighting and resisting, right? So as hard as it was to come today, I was so grateful that Dylan, Rochelle, myself, and Krystal and Sandra got to meet, because Krystal and Sandra, it's the first time I met them just this week. And to be honest, they already felt like home to me. You know, like they're my kasamas, they're my comrades. I already know they got my back because of our unity and our struggle, because we're fighting the same imperialist beast, because I know both of you are tired, you know, and we still do the work. And I came as heavy as I felt, because this is my family. This is not just my political home. And this is actually what makes me feel safer. So just thank you, you know, to Catalyst and to all of you. I know we're not almost done just questioning, but I just want to extend that when you join an org or the people's movement, you're joining a family. And beware, in families, we have our issues, and that's okay. We're going to learn from them too as we grow, right? And so even a lot of the like pointing out our shortcomings, that's fine. Let's do that in a principled, loving, and struggling way, because our movements are also being hurt by people not doing enough or not saying the correct things. And this work is something that we really need to care for. And so long live international solidarity.
Rochelle, really quick before we move to the questions, I did want to uplift. So one thing I always tell younger organizers that I've been able to mentor and be a part of is that develop your own set of principles. I mean, you heard Irma mention principles, but also it's something that I've done for myself, someone that is often in a lot of spaces, a lot of like diverse spaces. Like I created principles for myself because those are the things that I want to guide my work. In what you heard from Sandra, Irma, and myself today is a lot of our principles at work in the way that we choose to show up, in the things that guide our work and that help us be in better and right relationship with each other. And so I just want to encourage folks on that front too, and just uplift that we've named a lot of our principles in what we were talking about today, and encourage other folks to create those, adopt them from folks you admire and look up to, create your own, whatever it might be, but use that to guide your work. And I think that that's a huge thing that I've learned over lots of years of organizing, and want to encourage others to do before we move on to the next question.
Thank you for that. And actually, we're going to wrap up here. We didn't get very many questions, and I think you all provided so much in the time that I gave you with the few questions we had. So sadly, we're out of time, but just want to share deep appreciation to each of you for your critical leadership, for your work, for your brilliance, your determination, and just for everything you've offered and taught us today. Thanks for spending your Sunday afternoon with us. And I really want to appreciate everyone who helped make this event happen, the translators, all of the folks who helped with accessibility, and I know 15 or so folks helping behind the scenes right now. So just really wanted to name and appreciate all of you. I want to let Maggie have a quick moment to give us an update on how much we've raised, and then I'll turn it over to Raj to close this out. So again, just the deepest appreciation. My heart is full. Yeah, Maggie.
Thanks so much again, Rochelle. So as was previously mentioned, over half of the people who are currently on this call have donated. And I'm waiting for the final number right now, but yeah, I've just also like to close out by saying that I feel like I've learned so much in this discussion, both about international solidarity, but also about my own local social justice work. Every issue that you care about is tied to international struggle. I work to end homelessness in Cleveland, Ohio, and I know that colonization is a root cause of homelessness. From forced removal of Native peoples from their land here in the US on Turtle Island, to the evictions and demolition of Palestinian homes and the displacement of the rightful residents of those homes. None of these events are isolated. They're all the direct result of white supremacy. Colonization does dehumanize Indigenous peoples, and those of us who benefit from colonization also lose a vital part of ourselves. To reclaim our collective humanity, we must fight together for collective liberation, from Cleveland to Bacola to Gaza. And one way to do that, in addition to phone banking and canvassing and signing petitions and marching, is to donate directly to the organizations engaged in struggle. So if we want to drop the link one more time, and then I will get the final total. Yeah, we are at, let's see. Wow, we're at $13,890, y'all. That is amazing. Thank you so much for coming together. I'm just like speechless. That's like awesome. And these organizers are going to be able to take that back to their organizations and continue this vital work. And we're so grateful to all of you.
Thanks, Maggie. Raj, do you want to close us out?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Yeah, deep gratitude to everyone on this panel. Thank you all so much. And I just wanted to mention that ask everyone to save the next 2 dates for the upcoming open sessions, which will be spectacular also and powerful. So please save the date for Sunday, May 9th, which is Black Liberation Organizing, and Saturday, June 12th, which is Anti-Racist Organizing Strategies. And then for participants of the program, you have a 15-minute break, and please join your regular Zoom at quarter of, whatever time zone you're in. Thanks.